So we will look today at the differences and similarities between the Make Noise Mimeophone and the Strymon Magneto. Many people ask me which one they should get because they are looking to add a delay to their system. So this video is not about which one is better, but rather which one will fit your needs more. And hopefully you will see that if you have the resources, you will want to have both because they are quite different. So let's start with an overview before we get into some examples. Both Magneto and the Mimeophone are stereo so-called delay modules. Magneto is a 4-tap delay, which means that we can have 4 taps we can control, so we can control their levels, we can control their panning, we can also pitch shift them. Since it's a tape delay, we have also a few controls that can add color and character to the sound, like wow and flutter, tape age, and so on. Magneto is also amazing as a looper and also as a sort of a sampler, and there are many more features we will look at. Mimeophone is so-called an audio repeater. We have different zones we can choose from, and they will set the delay times. We have the halo control, which is a sort of a reverb. On Magneto we also have a reverb, a spring reverb, but in my opinion it's much more for adding character rather than an actual reverb. On the Mimeophone we have also color control to set and control the brightness of the repeated material. On Magneto we have a mono feedback loop, so mono send and return we can use to add, for example, a filter in the chain. So again, also the Mimeophone has many more features, so let's start with the basic functions of both. So here off screen I have plats that I can play. And by the way, I will not use any noise reduction plugins or declicking or anything similar. So if you hear noise, there is noise coming from the modules, but if you don't hear anything, it means that there is no noise. So we will start with Magneto. We have separate controls for the dry and wet. For now it's just the dry signal. Let's bring the wet signal up. We also need to change the recording level, so the level of the incoming signal to the delay. Let's do something like this. We can also really add character by clipping the sound, distorting the sound, which is also quite nice. And let's start bringing in the taps. Again, we have 4 taps and level controls for each of them. So this will be the first tap. Then the second one. And another one. And the fourth. We can change, of course, the delay time. Let's make it a bit faster. Or we can make it slower. We have also a tempo control, so we can tap the tempo if we wish. Very nice. And of course it can be synced also to a clock. Also the Mimeophone can be synced to a clock, but we will look at this later on. We can add feedback to the individual taps, so we can select which of the taps will go to the feedback loop, to the repeats. So let's say tap number 4, and now I can add repetitions. Let's add tap number 2 as well. Both Magneto and the Mimeophone can be used as full voices, by the way, but we will look at this also later on. As I mentioned before, we can add some color to the sound. So for example, with the spring reverb, all the way. We can add also wow and flutter, and this is really nice also, especially in longer delay times. You can hear how the pitch is moving. We can add some crinkle, which is also an effect of tape. And tape age, which will control the high frequencies or reduce them, or take the edge out of the high frequencies a bit. And we have also low cut, so we can cut the incoming low frequencies. And as I mentioned before, we have control on the individual taps, so I can change their if they are going to the repeats, and also the level, so I can set, for example, tap 1 to be a bit lower and make this sort of fade in. We can also change their, let's take the feedback out, change their panning, so I can make the panning left, right, left, right. Maybe a bit, let's take it a bit slower. Something like this. Or left, right, right, left. Or I can customize it as I wish. If I take it back to center, I can customize each of the taps. So for example, I want tap 1 to be all the way to the left, and then tap 2 all the way to the right. I just hold the feedback control and turn the knobs. And tap 3 I want in the center, and tap 4 I want also in the center. And we can also pitch shift the individual taps. So if I go to shift mode, let's take the levels down for a second. Tap 4 will stay our original sound. Tap 3 will be an octave down. Tap 2 will be an octave up. And tap 1 will be an octave and a fifth up. You can create a whole orchestra from just a simple sound. We can set the tape to run in reverse. Here we have the transport controls, so I can set it to run in reverse. And also freeze the recording, freeze the tape. Now I can pitch shift it. And by the way, Magneto has a really nice feature that you can quantize the speed or the pitch in this case, and then this will be quantized to a scale, and you have different scales to choose from, so you can really play this. And of course you have CV control for this as well. We can also stop the tape and play it again. So you can hear really how much character Magneto can add to a simple sound source. Let's see the same with the Mimeophon. I will take this down for a second. And now I will connect plats, the same voice exactly, to the Mimeophon. Here we have one control for the dry and wet, which is basically the mix, and we also have a CV input for this. We can change the delay times with the zone and the rate. By the way, Magneto has a delay time of up to 2 minutes and the Mimeophon up to about 40 seconds. Let's add some feedback here, some repeats on the Mimeophon. Also here we can reverse or flip the delays. And now here we can offset the left and right channels with the skew control. So it will change one channel to a faster delay and the other to a slower one. And also here we can freeze or hold the buffer, the delay. But here what's cool is that we can scan through the buffer similar to various granular modules available with the repeats knob. So now I can scan through this recording. Of course, also this is CV controllable. Let's add some halo, which will smear the repeated material and will add sort of a reverb kind of sound. And again, we can control the brightness of the sound with the color control, so we can make it darker or brighter. So already you can see and hear how different the Mimeophon and Magneto are, how much character they can add even to a simple sound. Let's have a look quickly at how they can sync to external clocks. So here I have a simple sequence coming from the MUX slicer. It's sequencing the Basimilus. Sounds like this. And again we will start with Magneto, so I will take the wet level up. And the first thing we can do is use the tempo control to sync the delay. Right, and I can tap tempo whatever I want basically. But we can also set Magneto to triplets, so here we have even or triplets. So now we have triplets as the delay time. Or again we can tap tempo. Something like this. But we also have a clock input that we can use to sync Magneto with external clocks. So I will use the clock output from the MUX slicer. And now the clock will set the delay time, but as far as I know there is no way to divide or multiply this clock. So if I change the pitch or the speed, it will change, but we'll go back to be in sync with the incoming clock. So if you want to sync Magneto, you will probably want to use a clock modifier to divide or to multiply the clock, or to use the tap tempo. Now there are also a few clock outputs which are really useful. We have 4. So clock output 1 will output 16th notes. And what I have here, I have psych going into freak, low pass filter in this case with the built-in VCA. And I have Rampage opening this VCA and also opening the filter. This is going through some just slight reverb from the Modus Versio here, you cannot really see it. But now I can use the first clock again, it will output 16th notes that are in sync with this clock to trigger a Rampage. Just so you can hear the clock. Clock 2 will output 8 notes. Then we have dotted 8 notes. And then we have quarter notes. And again, this will stay in sync with the clock, so you can use it in all sorts of ways. adding rhythms, driving sequencers. It's really helpful also for looping. We will see this later on. Now let's have a look at the Mimeophone. So I will just take this down and also this here out. So now this is coming from the Mimeophone. Let's add some delays. So here we don't have a tap tempo control. Maybe I will take this out for a second. We don't have tap tempo control, but we can set the delay time manually. And we can also choose to use the external clock input. So again, we can sync the Mimeophone with an external clock. I will use the same clock from the MOOC slicer. But here with the Mimeophone, we can divide and multiply the clock with the rate control. This will also work with the skew, so now the left and the right channels will have different delay times, but both will be in sync with the clock. And now here on the Mimeophone we also have a sort of a clock output, but it will output a combination of both delay times. So the delay time for the left channel and the delay time for the right channel. So this is a bit more unpredictable and experimental. Again, if I use the same voice I have here with Psych. Right, so this is basically an OR logic combination of the left and the right channels. You can create really interesting rhythms. So both can be synced to an external clock, but the Mimeophone is a bit more of an adventure and not so predictable like the Magneto. So now let's compare the looping capabilities of both. I have here Psych going to Freak, and I can play this voice with the key step. It's out of frame, so it will sound like this. We will start again with Magneto. So we have two modes on Magneto that we can use for looping. We have the loop mode and the sample mode. In loop mode, we can record a loop that will either fade out according to the repeats control, or we can hold it and let it loop over and over again. So first of all, tap number 4 will be the recording head, so it needs to be on. And we have to set Magneto to loop mode. Let's take also the wet all the way up. And now the speed control will determine the maximum length of the loop. All the way left is the maximum length and all the way to the right is the minimum. Let's put it somewhere in the center. And now we can start recording. So let's record something like this. And now it will loop, but will fade up according to the repeats control. Or we can record a loop and just set it to loop over and over again. If I go again to the transport, we have here the loop or freeze or hold function that we can use to hold this loop. Right, so I can just click it. Now it will continue looping just like this. And we can add to it. So now we have more layers. We can also add the other taps if we want. We can change the character, we can add a spring reverb, wow and flutter, and all the other goodies. We can change the pitch also of the recording. Again, I have it set to quantize mode, so it will be quantized to a scale. Take it down. And we can pitch shift also the individual taps, just like before. So if I go to shift mode, I can add the octave down, the octave up, and the octave and fifth up. And it will continue looping like this. Let's take it maybe. Now in this case, clock output number 4 will output a trigger whenever the loop ends. So we get a sort of an end of cycle output we can use for all sorts of things. For this example, I will use it to trigger the basimilus just so we can hear how it works. So have a look, have a listen. You will see that every time the loop ends, it will trigger the basimilus. Just like this. Let's listen to it one more time. Right, so we can use it to trigger all sorts of things in our patch. Now, there is also, if I get rid of this for a second, there is also sample mode, which is quite similar to loop mode. But in sample mode, we can trigger the recording and not have something that's always looping. So if I go to sample mode and I start recording something, as soon as I finish recording it, it will activate the loop. And now all we have to do is either trigger it with this button, or we can of course trigger it externally, so we have a sort of a sample recorded. Of course, it's also possible to have synced loops thanks to the record CV input, so you can set an external gate to start and stop the recording. Now the Mimeophon works a bit differently. If I switch it to the Mimeophon, it will work a bit differently. We don't have a way to record anything, but the Mimeophon will just sort of remember the incoming signal and we can choose to loop it. As I mentioned before, we can loop up to about 40 seconds of sound. So let's set the delay here, the zone, to maximum, maybe the rate also a bit up. And we can take also the repeats all the way up. So this is how it will loop basically. And now we can record into this. Change the rate, and of course also here we can add to this. And you can hear that it also it also remembers the movements I made with the rate control. And maybe you notice some of the noise. The Mimeophon is a bit noisy, but I think it adds to its character. Now it will continue looping. I can also hit the hold function and now it will hold the buffer. And now we can scan through the recorded material, through the looping material with the repeats control. Right, so we can basically scan through the loop. Add some halo. And again, we can change the color or the brightness of the sound. And again, also here we have the sort of a trigger output we can use to trigger different events. Although with the Mimeophon, as we've seen before, it will be a bit more experimental. So if I connect this to the stimulus, right, it will be a sort of an end of cycle of both the channels together. But still, it's fun to experiment with. So all in all, I guess that Magneto is more dedicated for traditional looping, and the Mimeophon is more for experimental looping and unpredictable results. Now let's have a look at how they perform as full voices. Both Magneto and the Mimeophon can self-oscillate, and they will follow 1 volt per octave, so you can sequence them and so on. So again, we will start with Magneto, and in order to kickstart it, we have to set the repeats all the way up and set a quick delay time, and maybe take the record level a bit. And already we get a voice. We can change the pitch again, and I have it quantized, so it will follow a scale. And we can control this with 1 volt per octave through the speed CV input. So I have here again a sequence coming from the Moog slicer and Harmonig. So I'm going to send the pitch to the speed input. And we get pitch. Can add some reverb, wow and flutter of course, and all the other stuff. With the tape edge we can take some of the high end out. Now we can also use the wet CV input as a sort of a VCA, so I have Harmonig also triggering here size, as you can see. So I'm going to take the envelope, and now we have also a VCA basically. Now, as I mentioned before, we have also a feedback loop, a send and return. Now, this is mono, it's not stereo, so it will sum the stereo signal into a mono signal. But we can use this to add, for example, a filter in the loop. So the send will go to the filter, and the filter will go back to the return. And now we have more timbre control to get really interesting results. Really nice. Now, also the Mimeophon, let's take this down for a second. Let's take this voice out. Okay, so also the Mimeophon, also in this case, it's a bit different. So let's start with taking the wet all the way up. By the way, in both cases, I don't have anything in the inputs, right? Because they will self-oscillate. So we'll take the wet all the way up and the zone all the way down, so it's in the shortest delay time. I will already take the color a bit down because I know what will come next. And now we can take the repeats or the feedback all the way up. And basically, we get a voice. With the color, we can change the color, the timbre. With the rate, we can change the pitch. And also this will follow, also the Mimeophon will follow 1 volt per octave. There is a special input for this here, the micro input. So I'm going to send the pitch information to this input. And it will follow 1 volt per octave. You can add some reverb. And also here we can use the mix as a sort of a VCA because it has a CV input, so I'm going to use again size for this. Very nice. So I hope this gave you some idea of how different Magneto and Mimeophon are. And if you are not sure which one to get, I hope this gave you a bit more information so you can choose what to add to your system. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg with both of them. But in my opinion, it makes sense to have both in your setup. If you have the resources, of course, and I don't mean just money, but also space and power. So thank you for watching, and cheers.